God afton och shalom vänner. Profetisk uppdatering lördag 2 december 2023. Jag vet inte om det blir så mycket profetiskt här, men det är ju mycket av det som händer. Ja, det är ju faktiskt jordbävningar är profeterat om att det kommer att öka bland annat. I eftermiddag så kom en nyhet att en jordbävning som uppmätts till 7,6 på Richterskalan har slagit till i havet utanför Filippinerna. Jordbävningen inträffade i havet 32 kilometers djup under havets botten. Enligt organisationen Europa Medelhavsseismologiska centret EMSC. Amerikanska myndigheter har utfärdat en tsunamivarning efter jordbävningen. Jordbävningen slog till öster om Filippinernas näst största ö, Mindanao, som har över 25 miljoner invånare. Enligt filippinska seismologiska myndigheten kommer den första tsunamivågen att slå mot kusten inom kort och det beräknas fortsätta komma under flera timmar. Vågorna beräknas bli mellan 1 till 3 meter höga vid Filippinernas kust. En tsunamivåg som bara är 1 meter hög är enligt Björn Lund, universitetslektor i seismologi på Uppsala universitet, fortfarande mycket farlig. Den räcker inte lika långt i något land, men den kan göra stor skada vid kusten på grund av de oerhörda mängder vatten den för med sig. Det finns inte en chans att du står upp mot en 1 meters tsunamivåg, säger han. Ja, det kanske kan ju låta lite egentligen 1 meter, men man förstår vilka krafter det är att man är ganska utsatt. Invånare i städerna Surigao del Sur och Davao har uppmanats att evakuera och ta sig till högre mark, skriver AP. Den filippinska tidningen Inquirer uppger att kraftiga skakningar har känts av på flera ställen. Tsunamivarningar har även utfärdats för Palau, Malaysia, delar av Indonesien och Japan. Tsunamivågor upp till 1 meter höga väntas slå mot Japans västkust under natten. Så det skakar där borta. Ja, här har vi en bild från Telegram. Global uppvärmning eller varning. Tung snö och is har frusit jetplan i München på väg till Dubais globala uppvärmningskonferens. Det var väl lägligt. Ja. Så ska jag så här idag. Litar man på någon som alltid ljuger? Nej. Varför lyssnar svensk media då på Hamas-anhängare? De är ju så duktiga på att hitta precis det de vill. Och det är ju inte så svårt alltid om man vet vad man ska fråga, vilka människor man ska fråga. Det är alltid Gazaborna nu som det är synd om. Och ja, det finns mycket att säga om det. Vi går till Israel då. Så har det kommit på Telegram. Det mesta är ju från Amir Safati. Även andra en del israelisk media eller informatörer där. Efter att en Hezbollah-pansarvärnsraket avfyras mot israelisk stad vid gränsen attackerar Israels flygvapen en rad mål i södra Libanon. Dessutom intensiva flygningar av stridsflygplan över Beirut. Det är Hezbollah antagligen då där uppe som bråkar, håller på som vanligt mot Israel. Och det var idag eftermiddag här raketsirener i hela Galileen. Massiva explosioner hördes i den palestinska staden Jenin. Han skriver Amir, jag tror att det var raketer som avfyrades från Jenin in i Israel. Och de byggde raketer där också. I Jenin då. Och sen var det raketsirener i Israels största arabiska stad Nasaret. Och vem som helst, varje sunt tänkande normal människa förstår ju att inte Israel kan acceptera detta ständiga terror och dessa ständiga skjutningar in över landet som har pågått i åratal. Förutom det fruktansvärda som hände 7 oktober och allt därifrån. 11 000 raketer är det väl uppe i nu. Så var det också information här om att en israelisk delegation har besökt Doha i Qatar under lördagsmorgonen, idag alltså, för att diskutera medlingen av en eventuell ny vapenvila mellan Israel och Hamas. Men enligt ett uttalande från den israeliska underrättelsetjänsten Mossad har förhandlingarna inte varit framgångsrika. Israels premiärminister Benjamin Netanyahu har nu beordrat delegationen att återvända till Israel. Ja, det är väl ändå bra att de inte böjer sig för vad som helst. Verkligen. Och här kommer nu en video från TV7 Israel News med svensk text. Och det handlar om den nuvarande situationen också i Israel. Och en hel del om norra Israel och Hezbollah. Så att hoppas att det kan vara intressant för den som vill se. Så jag tackar för mig och jag önskar Guds välsignelse och shalom.
Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update, and today is the 57th day since the Islamist terror groups from the Hamas-plagued Gaza Strip launched an onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre which included the murder of some 1,400, mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping 245 individuals, including women, children, elderly, and infants. As we continue to update you from here in Jerusalem, and as the Islamist terror groups and the Hamas-plagued Gaza Strip have launched dozens of indiscriminate rockets towards populated areas throughout Israel, particularly in the south, as well as rocket fire from the north, we will turn initially to the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense, Brigadier General in Reserve, Doron Gavish. Thank you for joining us, General. What could you update us on the latest?
Well, if we start with those rockets, so you're right, Jonathan, we saw the rockets that were sent or shot toward Israel from the Gaza Strip. We saw it yesterday evening, even though the central part of Israel, and also today, but the majority of the rockets, as you were saying, were shot toward the southern part of Israel. So this is, of course, something that we anticipated once this fight is being resumed, and at least from the defense point of view, and in a minute we will talk about what is being done in the offense, but on the defense point of view, we see that the Israeli air defense is fully prepared to it. The vast majority of those rockets were intercepted, although we continuously say to our civilians that the defense is never hermetic, and we expect them to, of course, to listen to those orders that are being issued by the Israeli Home Front Command going into the shelters, and the combination of the passive defense and the active defense keep us with a very low number of casualties and the people that were wounded or armed in any way from those rockets. But we have to say that, from the micro point of view, we talked about the two main goals of the war, and we also were saying again and again that there is kind of a tension between the two main goals of this war, and the IDF is operating in kind of an equalizer some of the days, or majority of the days until now. We saw this goal of striking the Hamas, eliminating his capabilities as a military organization and as the ruler on the Gaza Strip, and this was from the one hand, and then from the other, and of course, is the release of the hostages from the hands of those terrorists. And so we could say that in the equalizer between those two goals, in the last 24 hours, we are back to the fight with the Hamas. The IDF is striking in the northern part, in the southern part, but also in the south part of the Gaza Strip. We saw hundreds and hundreds of targets that were struck during the last 24 hours. And we have to say that a lot of them are in Khan Yunis area, which is in the south part of Israel. We see strikes by the Israeli Air Force. We see strikes by the Israeli Navy, and of course by the ground forces. The last thing that I would say is that, from a commander's point of view, this transition between the time that the soldiers were in preparation, and once again, you were asking about it more than once, how does we basically prepare the soldiers to the next step and to maneuver between being in a pause line or pause, in the pause situation to a fighting situation. And this is, of course, from the commander point of view, a challenge that they had to deal with. And we could say that looking on the way that the IDF is operating, looking on the way that the soldiers are operating, the morale is high, determination is there from the highest level of the command in the IDF and until the last soldier. And they are determined to win this war and to continue as long as it will take to achieve the two main goals that I mentioned before.
Thank you, General Gavish. Let's immediately also turn to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, in the early 90s, the late Prime Minister, Defense Minister, and before that also IDF Chief of General Staff, namely the late Yitzhak Rabin, was asked about a scenario of a hostage that was captured at the time by Hamas, to which the question was about whether or not to communicate with the terrorist organization or to activate military power to try and rescue the hostage. And he responded that if the government in Jerusalem requires to decide between A, communicating with terrorists, and B, activating military power in order to rescue the hostage, the latter would always take precedent. Is that still the case today? And if so, how is that translated into reality?
So Rabin, even earlier as prime minister during the Entebbe crisis, always said that the commitment of the Israeli government and the obligation of the government to its citizens is to try and get them released either by force or by negotiations and bargaining. If there is a military option, if there is enough credible intelligence and an operational plan can be devised, yes, then that is the priority. But if not, he was for speaking with the enemy and even giving up to the enemy's demands because it is uppermost in all Israelis' minds that no one should be left behind. And this ties in nicely with what has been happening today, or actually yesterday and today, the 2 days following the breakdown of the first truce, which lasted 7 days. In Qatar, we have a team of Mossad officials and apparently also CIA officials speaking with their Qatari interlocutors who are speaking with Hamas emissaries all the way down to Yahya Sinwar in his hideout. Apparently, the Egyptians are also involved. What happened today, and this is, of course, a famous diplomatic tactic going also to the Camp David negotiations back in 1978, when the Israeli delegation, in a very public fashion, took its luggage out of the cabins and ordered their plane to get ready to take off back to Tel Aviv, all of that in order to put pressure on President Sadat to compromise. So today, it was made public by the Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem that both Netanyahu and Mossad director Dadi Barnea, who earlier was in Qatar himself, ordered the Mossad delegation to come back to Israel because Hamas is not compromising enough. One can guess without too much of a risk that the talks will resume. And therefore, what we heard earlier from General Gavish regarding the 400 plus sorties, 400 plus strikes that the IDF has landed on Khan Yunis and other targets. This is mostly the score. This is the music which accompanies the main event, and the main event is still the negotiations, because if Israel can get even several more hostages out before the heavier part of the fighting resumes, when ground forces start encircling Khan Yunis and approaching Rafah and other strongholds of Hamas, so much the better. And what we will have tonight, one of the biggest rallies for the hostage release in Tel Aviv, will obviously spearhead the discussion, because some of those released hostages are supposed to appear either on video or perhaps in person, in order to call on the government to make a special and invigorated effort to release the others.
Indeed. Well, when diplomats stop talking, guns start blazing. And with that being said, of course, as General Clausewitz wrote in his book, or his wife wrote most of that book, so I'm not sure if that's the part, but when we're talking about war, it's merely an extension of politics, and so is diplomacy, and so is economy, and therefore we need to understand the complex web of activities that are currently undertaken and accompanied with the fighting in the Hamas-plagued Gaza Strip. Let's turn now to Central Israel, where we're joined by Colonel in Reserve Miri Eisen, a longtime intelligence official and the director of the Institute for Counterterrorism at Reichman University in Herzliya. Thank you for joining us, Colonel. I'm very keen on hearing your perspective on what is the key challenge right now from a holistic perspective, but also not to forget that the Gaza Strip is spilling over, at least a situation there, to additional locations. We saw the deadly terror attack here in Jerusalem, not far away from our studios, as well as additional attacks, an attempted stabbing attack earlier today that was countered by IDF soldiers. And there is, of course, the extension of Operation Wavebreaker, which included, to date, from October 7th, over 2,100 apprehended suspected terrorists, mostly, including of which 1,100 are members or operatives of the Islamist Hamas.
When I look at it right now, Jonathan, it's called the combination. And can I be cute about it and say the combo? So you talk about the military. Well, lots of challenges looking into the future. You talk about diplomacy for the hostages, because at the end, it's diplomacy that brought out the hostages until now. That doesn't mean that we can't find here and there hostages also through the military option. But at the end, when I said the combo, it's called the details of today on the 57th day are no different. The Israeli economy cannot totally be shut down forever. The reservists that are called up cannot be called up forever. Our military operation is something that needs to be focused, clear, systematic, but there's no question, both for us as Israelis, and not because of the international community, but because we are a country that wants to look at itself in the mirror, we need to try to put down the amount of civilian casualties that Hamas use as human shields. We need to do that for ourselves, beyond the fact that it's the right thing to do. And because of that, what you have right now looking into the future is, how do you balance these different aspects? How do you find that military operation that takes into account our needs to destroy Hamas in Khan Yunis, in Rafah, let alone in the northern Gaza Strip, where we're already encircling and closing in? And you need to do that with the minimizing amount of civilian casualties, because that's the right thing to do, beyond the fact that Hamas are cruelly using them. And hand in hand with that, you're continuing diplomacy. And hand with that, you're trying to reignite our economy. We're 2 months into a war that also has its own domestic impact. It's impacting the education system. It's impacting so many different things. And so when I look into the future now, if we were 2 months very focused onto the hostages, onto the military operation, and those two, looking into the distance now, I'd say that the added aspect is looking both domestically beyond just the specific military and the hostages, as I said, the economy, the education system. And Jonathan, none of us can ignore, we can't ignore the rest of the world. For the moment, I'm going to say I will ignore them, not because they don't matter anything, but there's such a gap between the way that we view, understand what Israel is doing in the military operation and in the negotiations, but we do want to be hand in hand with the chief ally and big supporter of the United States of America. So looking now into the future, we've had 2 months of amazing backing, 2 months of something which really made the whole difference. Now we're looking at that stage where already the Vice President of the United States is putting out that they're talking about much more specific ideas and plans for what would happen with the Gaza Strip and the West Bank after, and I'm still in the middle of the war. So as I said, it's the combo. Don't just focus on the one, focus on the different elements and the challenge. How does the government of the State of Israel, with the military, with the security establishment, strike the balance which works the best for Israel, but that takes into account all of these different elements?
Thank you, Colonel Eisen. I do agree that there needs to be a clear balance between the two, with clear objectives also from Israel's perspective. Understand the consequences of each action taken and the ramifications thereof. Nevertheless, when I do look at the international community, I do also hear the staunch support emanating out of New Delhi, India. The Indian people have stood by Israel resolutely, understanding full well the complexities and the threats emanating from Islamist organizations and the terror that is sweeping out of those groups throughout the world, not only in Israel or in the Gaza Strip. I'm looking also at Germany, at the Netherlands, at Britain, and as well, also, not to forget the United States, where we need also to keep in mind that in the next 12 to 14 months, we're going to see a different government there, as well as in much of Western civilization. So there are things that we also need to take into account for the long term and not just to the medium to short term. General Gavish, when we're looking at northern Israel, the Hezbollah terrorist organization and Iranian proxy has yet again entered into the fold, trying to probe Israeli defenses, at the same time also trying to convince Israel that it is resolute or not entirely deterred by what it's seeing in the Gaza Strip, even though I don't seem to be entirely convinced by Hezbollah's intention at this point. What do you see when you're looking northward?
Well, indeed, Jonathan, we are still under the famous war level or full-scale war level with the Hezbollah, and it seems, at least by looking back, that the Hezbollah is determined to this point of starting a full-scale war with Israel. But on this, we have to say, I think, two important observations. The first one is that there is a fight, as you mentioned. There is a fight in the northern part of Israel. There are rockets that are being shot toward Israel. There are UAVs that are being sent, an anti-tanks unit, and mortars, and the Hezbollah is trying to take part in this war and act as an act of solidarity, and we see it, and we also have to say that at least on the tactic level, again, looking back, the Hezbollah have around 90 and even more terrorists which are dead in those fights with the IDF. Most of his rockets were intercepted or out of bound. The UAVs, the vast majority of them were intercepted from, at least from the operational point of view. We could say that on the tactic level, on the insurgents that we saw during the last few weeks, the Hezbollah is losing in the fight. Having said that, we have to remember that by saying that he is being deterred, we are applying our rationality, we are applying our assessment of what we are seeing around. But today, and mainly after the 7th of October, Israel doesn't take any chances. Therefore, Israel is still deployed in the northern part of Israel. Still, we have hundreds of thousands of reservists that are deployed in this area. The vast majority of the Israeli Air Force is prepared to this arena if it would be if there would be an escalation. So this is for the northern arena. Of course, talking about the Iranians' proxies, we have to remember the threat coming from the Red Sea. We have to still and continuously be prepared also to this threat. And by the way, not only from there, also from the east, from Iraq, and you call it always the elephant in the room, but also from Iran. So as an IDF, we have to be prepared 360 degrees, and this is exactly what is happening. Of course, we saw it in the world of rockets and missiles once we applied the multi-tier defense and intercepted those long-range missiles. We have to say, since first time since the Gulf War that such a long-range missiles were shot toward Israel, and all of those were intercepted by the Arrow system. The other thing that, and the IDF, of course, fighters, women and men, we should say. The other thing which is important to say and to mention is, of course, the cooperation between the United States, CENTCOM, and the IDF. We still have to remember that there is a very vast, I would say, deployment here of CENTCOM, and there is the U.S. presence is unprecedented since World War II in our arena. And the cooperation is very tight. We saw it in the last few weeks, but also in the last few days. So, you know, for at least from the military point of view, I think that the system is ready for the continuation of the fight. But I would, you know, noted on the last thing that I would like to say, that I fully agree with what was just mentioned by Miri, and she's right. We have to look on this war as something that we take for a long time. We have to prepare our systems, all of them, the civilian system, the military system, the strategic arena for a long war. But we have no other chance other than winning this war. This would be a win for Israel against a terror organization. A vicious one, but this would be also a win for the Western world, that those organizations, terror organizations, and we talked about it, ISIS, Daesh, Hamas, are the same, and we must be determined in eliminating as much as we can those terrorists.
Thank you, General Gavish. Mr. Oren, 2 points that I'd like to ask you, and the first one regarding what General Gavish noted regarding the displaced, internally displaced Israelis, both from southern Israel, but as well as from northern Israel in particular, while the southern Gaza Strip will enter into the fold of Israeli targets and objectives to clear it from Hamas and other terror elements. The northern arena is more complex, and therefore the Israeli government is currently engaged in preparing the ground to find a solution, potentially diplomatic, but also, if that is not exhausted and does not bear fruit, for that matter, they will divert to military power, something that could, of course, have far-reaching consequences.
Yes, but Israel is not totally sovereign and independent in its decision-making. It is part of a coalition, not for the first time. In 1956 with Britain and France, and in 1991 as the invisible and passive member of the coalition against Saddam Hussein. And you may say that then again, over the last decade, in the fight against ISIS, where the Israeli Air Force had a major part, but was unannounced. But today, Israel is operating under strict supervision of the Biden administration. Israel, both the defense ministry, the IDF, the intelligence community, and the war cabinet, they all have to take up their draft plans for authorization by Secretary Blinken, Secretary Austin, and of course, in the final analysis, President Biden. And this is the easy part, because the administration itself is now subject to congressional pressure, and there is quite a debate going on in Washington on whether the United States should condition its military aid to Israel by putting restrictions and limits on the use of these weapons. Now, why is this such a severe limit on Israel's ability to operate? Because the administration must report to Congress once this legislation passes. And there is no way to negotiate. Israel cannot negotiate with the House of Representatives or the Senate once this is a law in the books. And therefore, in order to forestall such a calamity for Israel, Israel must take into consideration the problems and needs of the Biden administration as they enter an electoral season. The presidential and congressional elections are upon us, and this will hamper the Israeli military planning vis-a-vis both Lebanon and southern Gaza. It is not as if you are in front of a drawing board in the Israeli General Staff, you can move around divisions and air wings and think that you are master of the universe.
Well, the Pentagon has shown its potent capacity, particularly under Central Command in its activities throughout the region. The limitations that the Biden administration has put on CENTCOM to defend itself, with over 74 strikes that were published by the Pentagon and confirmed, and many more strikes, by the way, since October 17th, that were not necessarily as severe, and therefore they were taken off the books. The Biden administration's foreign policy, in my opinion, and this is my opinion alone, has not really reflected a very credible activity that is also reflected to the rest of the Middle East, not only to Israel, to all allies and partners around the world, and that is something that the United States needs to take into account. I don't think that the Biden administration is currently doing their allies and partners service, nor the United States in particular, but we'll leave that for another time since we don't have very much time left. And in any case, whatever elections or partisan attitude that the Biden administration might have, we might disagree on this matter. But I personally think that bipartisan activities should be unanimous in the United States when they're talking about foreign policy. Colonel Eisen, the final minutes are yours. Where are we looking right now? What should we focus on? And what should Jerusalem take into account within the framework of what it can decide on in the near future?
We need to be focused right now on how we do the combo, how we both defeat militarily and what that means, how we continue to work on the diplomatic front with the hostages. And perhaps what I'll add into this is that for the first time, I feel that the governments do support us, Jonathan, and they'll say that to us in closed rooms, and they go outside and say something else, because at the end, the popular opinion, the social media, that younger generation, that's a whole battlefield that needs to be taken care of, because at the end, I say as an Israeli, make the decisions that will make us safer, more secure inside the state of Israel, which doesn't mean being ostracized by the rest of the world. It means keeping a heart, being moral, act the way that we need to do. And if we can find that delicate balance, we're going to go on ahead and achieve our goals.
Absolutely. Thank you, Colonel Eisen. I'd like also to thank General Gavish and Mr. Oren. And I think also with regard to your latter remark, Colonel Eisen, we need to keep in mind that the silent majority stands by Israel. And that is something that many people don't understand, at least not the vocal, marginal majority of the various Marxistic and Islamist groups throughout the West. But ultimately, we know who stands behind us, and those governments are very privy to the shift throughout the political scene in Europe, America and other countries as well. I'd like immediately also to thank all of you from here in Jerusalem until our next update. Shalom.